Hey Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Welcome into another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. Now, free agency gets rolling next week, and the Raiders are projected to have over $90 million in cap space to work with. Right now, that is the second highest number in the league. So the big question is, how are they going to spend all that cash? And that is what I'm tackling on today's show. First, I take a deep dive into the free agency class as a whole, going position by position to explain the best fits and shrewd pickups for the Raiders that I feel make the most sense for them and could actually set them up for some long-term success. Then we're bringing Vinny Bonsignore from Raider Nation Radio and the California Post back into the fold to get his take on what the Combine revealed about the Raiders' approach not only to the draft, but free agency and honestly the offseason as a whole. So as we get set to dive into the biggest moment of the offseason so far, this is your one-stop shop for how the Raiders can navigate it all. But before we dive into all of that, you guys know how we got to do it. We got to get to our question of the day, and I want to know which free agents you guys have circled in silver and black, okay? Let me know in the comments below who you want to see in Vegas next season and why. And if you haven't already, too, make sure you do smash that subscribe button here on YouTube and check us out online at silverandblacksportsnetwork.com as well to subscribe to our free Raiders newsletter. You guys know it's chock full of all the latest Raiders news, insights, and analysis delivered straight to your inbox every Friday morning. And again, it's completely free. A great way to support me, the channel, our brand, all of it. So do go check that one out. And now get ready for the deepest dive that you're going to find on the internet into the Raiders free agency approach. All right, guys, let's start with my take on how the Raiders will likely approach free agency as a whole. Outside of maybe one or two guys, don't expect the Raiders to be throwing that money around like they're at the club, okay? We have mentioned the term intelligently aggressive many times. SpyTech used that term recently, and I think it applies here. There's been so much turnover, not only on the staff, but just cycling of players, and not necessarily in the last year's class either, but just over the last handful of years with the Raiders. And it's been sprinkled in with a bunch of misses in the draft, especially dating back to those years where they had 5 first-round picks in the span of 2 years. That should have set the franchise up for so many seasons of success, but instead, it set them back in a big way. So for me, this free agent cycle is all about the shrewd moves. You got to make those smart moves, targeting mostly younger-leaning guys to find a lot of those who can actually kind of help fix and fill in a lot of those draft woes and inject some talent back into this roster along with the draft, and letting those guys on their second deals in the league grow alongside some of the recent draft picks and this year's draft crop as well, because again, that is how I think you build for long-term success, and it's about setting a foundation going forward, and I think that's how you do it in this situation, how the Raiders are saying they want to approach it as well. So with that all laid out, keep it in mind as I now tackle this free agent class. This is a beast. And so here's how I'm going to do it, all right? I'm going to throw a handful of key positions and look at the landscape of free agents in each of those spots and give you guys my take on who makes sense for the Raiders and why in each of those spots. And we'll start at the most important spot for them this offseason, and that's at center. That should surprise nobody, okay? The Raiders have to get it right at center with this offense, okay? Especially with a young quarterback coming into the fold. The center position really becomes like an extension of the coach and or play caller and can make life so much easier on Fernando Mendoza as he adjusts to life in the NFL. Now, look, obviously JPJ could be an option there, but personally, my read on the situation from covering the team for the last couple of years and just obviously seeing how things have transpired and talking to folks, I think that he ends up being a guard for them. That's just my read on it. So, surveying the landscape, I also personally like attacking center in the draft versus going at it in free agency. I think in the draft, you can find some really good guys in the third round. We talked about the options at center a couple of recent podcasts lately. Sam Heck, to me, is at the top of the board. If I'm the Raiders making that pick, I think he should be there in the third round. When I've drawn the mock drafts, he has always been there. That kid looks rock solid. But let's take a look at the free agent options. And again, like I said, even though I favor drafting a center, if you can get this guy, you do it. Tyler Linderbaum, obviously at the top of everyone's list around the league of the teams that are looking for centers, okay? He's 25 years old, already a 3-time Pro Bowler. And this is just the beginning for him, okay? Obviously, like I noted, he is the top option. There is no denying any of that. But he's likely going to eclipse the $20 million per year mark, okay? For reference, the current highest paid center in the NFL right now is Kansas City's Creed Humphrey, and he makes $18 million a year. That is wild, okay? Linderbaum could command 20 to even possibly 22 a year. Just wild. It's going to be a market resetting number. The Ravens said they already offered that to him. Obviously, they have to play the open market, but shoot, it's going to be wild. And obviously, look, the Raiders do have the money, but it would likely command like 20% plus of their cap space. And if you can get him, obviously you're going to do it. I just, again, personally don't see it happening. I think he's going to have a lot of suitors. And honestly, Vinny and I dive into that a little deeper too. So we'll give you guys more of our take on how it plays out with Linderbaum as well later on the show. But then there's another really interesting option and some new developments surrounding him as well, okay? And that is Connor McGovern. I think he's the second best option in a very top-heavy free agent class at center, okay? He brings versatility because he has played some guard and center, but if you sign him, you bring him into the fold to be your center. Don't do this whole sliding around and all that stuff, okay? The other great thing with him is that he is shown to be very, very durable. Only 5'0" linemen in the NFL have logged more snaps than him over the last 4 seasons. So that is massive. He's one of those guys that's going to be there on game day for you, and you need that along the offensive line. It is a brutal position for teams to be able to play, okay? And his 69.1 PFF overall grade in 2025 ranked 13th among centers. He's been in the high 60s in his run blocking grade as well, so all around just a solid player. Going to be tough to beat a guy like him. The early reports were that he wasn't going to get out of Buffalo, but I recently saw a report that he hasn't even heard from Brandon Beane, so he's likely in play. So keep an eye on him and see how that kind of transpires, okay? But there are some other guys who are very interesting if the Raiders do indeed decide to hit the open market in free agency and kind of look ahead. And a couple of these guys have some ties. Well, one of them in particular does, in Lloyd Cushenberry, okay? He just got cut by the Titans. He's 28 years old and is coming off of shoulder surgery, but it sounds like he'll be ready to roll for the 2026 season. So don't look into that one too much. And here's the other thing, okay? He also has experience with Clint Kubiak and their assistant head coach, Mike McCoy. He was Kubiak's center in Denver back in 2022 when Clint was the passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach for the Broncos. He obviously also worked with McCoy last year in Tennessee when Mike was a senior offensive assistant and an interim head coach there as well. He's not a top option by any means. Neither him nor the next guy we're going to talk about are, but he is a scheme fit, and he has ties to 2 of the top decision makers within this staff. SpotTrack puts him averaging about an average annual value of about $7 million a year on a deal, that is. Obviously, that would be a bargain to be able to get a guy like him for that money, and it could open the door for them to sign him and still draft a guy at center as well and kind of let the competition get rolling in that position because, again, this is a very key piece in this offense. You want to make sure you're getting the best guy out there, but the history with Kubiak and McCoy could mean a lot for him. Real curious to see how it works out for him. The next guy is honestly the one that is the most interesting to me, and that is Tyler Biadasz. Okay, again, most interesting, I say that in the sense of if you can't get Linderbaum. But Tyler Biadasz, first and foremost, he is a high football IQ guy, and he thrives in zone blocking schemes. So you can check both of those boxes in terms of the IQ and the fit into the scheme with the heavy zone blocking and the wide zone that they do want to run, okay? According to Pro Football Focus, his 70.7 grade ranked 11th among all qualified centers, and his 71.2 run blocking grade ranked 12th at the position. That is well above average at center, and you can bring him in and instantly elevate your group in a big way. He can run this offense, there's no doubt about it. And here's the kicker for you, Raider Nation. This one I know is going to make a lot of you guys happy to hear if they do indeed end up getting him. He was penalized just 3 times last year, just 3 times, and he got credited with only 3 sacks allowed as well, which is really impressive given the fact that he played a lot of pass blocking snaps in particular, 571 of them last season. Obviously, we'll see what the deal could look like for him, but there are projections out there that say he could come in right around that $10 million a year mark. And again, that's a very fair price for a dude to come in and stabilize your O-line. I don't think Washington should have cut this guy. I think he's a very underrated guy. So if it does work out and the Raiders go the free agency route and do land him and can't land Linderbaum, this to me would be my first pick for the Raiders. I think Biadasz would be a guy to bring into the fold, and you right off to the sunset. Like, I think he'd be really good there. Now, as we keep kind of looking at the rest of the offensive line, let's take a look at some of the guards, okay? Isaac Seumalo is another very interesting piece. PFF first, put him on my radar in terms of, like, ties to the Raiders, and when we dive into the stats, you guys will see why he seems like one hell of a fit for the Raiders, okay? In his 3 seasons with the Steelers, He put his run blocking chops on display in a very big way. He was in the 82nd percentile as a run blocker in gap schemes. But here's the key for Kubiak and the Raiders. He was in the 92nd percentile in zone concepts. Boom. Scheme fits it. He knows how to run zone concepts. And on top of that, because they're not just going to run the football, this is a very balanced offense. We know that Clint loves himself some play action passes as well, okay, to play off of that run game. Seattle was second in the NFL in percentage of their passing yards coming from play action this season, and that is great for Seumalo because he generated the fourth highest play action PFF pass blocking grade among guards at 87.8. And he could come in around that $8 to $10 million a year mark. Yet another solid deal for a really, really good player. Again, a shrewd move there to bring him in there. I think if they managed to get Biadasz and him, those are two really quality guys that you got on a quote-unquote deal, and you just totally flipped your O-line around. Now, there are some other guards out there that are interesting and make sense, okay? Keep an eye on a guy like Zion Johnson. There's David Edwards from the Bills, Wyatt Teller from the Browns, even former Raider John Simpson. Keep an eye on him. But again, I think JPJ does end up being a guard for them. They've also got Caleb Rogers, and we can't rule out Dylan Parham returning as well. He's only 26 years old. I was surprised to realize that. I was like, wow, he's still so young when you really think about it. A 4-year starter for the Raiders and had 64 games under his belt as well. It's hard to find guys at that age with that kind of experience and that kind of consistency. Again, this staff thinks they can get more out of the guys that they've had in the fold. You would imagine he's a guy they think they can get back to a real good level there. If not, somebody else is going to pay him. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that we see go somewhere else and have success. So we'll see what happens with him. But another interesting name to watch at guard is Elijah Vera Tucker. Injuries obviously have been a thing here with him. And I'll have a little bit here on injuries later on in the show to explain why, yes, it's a problem because you can't completely fix injuries, but why the Raiders might be in an interesting spot to take a chance on some of these guys that have had problems with injuries over the years. But last year, a torn bicep sidelined him for the season, yes, but look, he got some real promise in him if he can stay healthy. He's another guy who is also young, only 26 years old, and has earned 3 straight season-long 70-plus overall grades from PFF, and he allowed the 4th lowest pressure rate among guards back in 2024. That's not too long ago, okay? Again, a former first-round pick, super athletic, and would fit this scheme well because of that athleticism, so keep an eye on him to possibly be in the mix as well. Now, tackle, it's an interesting spot, okay? Clint's comments where he said that they have, quote, stability at both tackle spots, that is, kind of gave me a bit of a pause about looking too deeply into the tackle market. It sounds like he may like DJ Glaze, and obviously they have a solid project player in Charles Grant to compete at that spot. But at the end of the day, we've only seen Charles for 2.5 quarters. And yes, he can talk with Spy Tech, Clint, that is. He can talk with Spy Tech to figure out the deal with Charles Grant. But they only have so much to go off of him. So they got to figure out what they've got in both of those guys. But in terms of options out there, Braden Smith is out there in free agency. He's been the guy at right tackle for the Colts for the last 8 years, a steady force there. They're moving on from him, getting younger at that position. But he has struggled with injuries in the last 3 seasons, so keep that in mind. But he's only given up 5 sacks in that span, okay? Very interesting in that regard. I think he's one of those guys that will be one of the top options at right tackle there. And then another one here, I'm probably going to catch some heat from some of you guys. Excuse me here. I got allergy season here in Vegas. A bunch of weather came through, a bunch of wind, and really chalked it up. So today I'm doing well. Yesterday I was struggling big time. But another guy to pay attention to here is Jermaine Illuminor. And I know, before you guys start going after me on the keyboard and the comments and all that stuff, he's an option because, look, this guy, I think, has played better than a lot of people realize, okay? He's actually 16th in Pro Football Focus's pass blocking grade rankings since 2024, and he's tied for 7th in pressure rate allowed, just 4.3% of the time that he allowed a pressure. I know a lot of you guys obviously don't love him. I do think he's better than a lot of you guys think, and in his last 2 seasons here in Las Vegas, a lot of people forget that he actually played pretty well, okay? He finished with 71.5 and 75.7 run blocking grades, running a pretty even mix of zone and gap schemes here for the Raiders. So, this is a guy that, overall, you could do much worse than adding a Jermaine Illuminor back into the fold. And it was a weird end for him here in Las Vegas, but overall, good locker room guy, just a fun guy to be around. I really enjoyed talking with him when he was in the locker room, loved having him around. So I'm curious to see what happens at the tackle spot if he possibly is in play. Overall, though, I've said it, I don't necessarily in this podcast and previous podcasts, I don't love the idea of signing a tackle on the open market. History tells you want to draft and develop those guys and keep them in-house for a long time. Obviously, the Raiders have done that with DJ Glaze, and he's kind of stuck and stayed true at that position. So it tells you that philosophy is something that they've kind of believed in over the years, even with all the different coaches that have come through. But if they go into the draft, I'd really like Blake Miller out of Clemson. He is an Iron Man in every sense of the word, and honestly, I think that he could be the answer at right tackle for them for many years to come. Maybe he's their version of Braden Smith there on the right side and plays for 8+ years, a decade, whatever it is, if they manage to get him. But if you want him, you might have to grab him there in the second round. Maybe you'll get lucky and he falls to third, but like when I was doing mocks, it just seems like he's always there at the top of the second and quickly goes after that. So it might be kind of tough to grab him. I don't know how they're going to want to allocate that draft resource at the top of the second. I would imagine they go Mendoza and then probably try to address defense, specifically, nose tackle early on at that point. If not, I do think maybe tackle could be in play. Tackle, offensive line in general, whether it's center or tackle in the second or third round, given like who's there. That's going to, again, be a fascinating spot to watch to see, one, who's available, who's slid, all those things, and how the Raiders approach it. But now I want to know, what about running back, okay? They're going to bring a number 2 guy into the fold to play second fiddle to Ashton Jeanty. And look, yes, Clint Kubiak wants to run those 2-back systems, 2-back sets, and wants it to be running back by committee. You don't draft Ashton Jeanty that high, and I know he didn't draft Ashton Jeanty, but Ashton's going to be the lead dog. We know that. But they are going to bring somebody else in, and you got to have a really solid number 2 back in this scheme in particular. And there's 2 guys that I think are very, very interesting when I started digging deeper into the free agent class and looking at their numbers and the metrics and all that stuff, okay? And J.K. Dobbins, for me, is one of the guys that I would put in that top 2 that I'm like, man, a real shrewd pickup for the Raiders, okay? He would be an awesome guy to add as that 1-2 punch to Jeanty, because last year he was on a tear through the first 10 weeks of the season. He earned an 80.8 Pro Football Focus rushing grade and forced 32 missed tackles and managed 21 explosive carries. That was before he went down with a season-ending foot injury, but that was really good production for him before all that went downhill, and obviously misses the end of the season. But so you just look at him as a whole, he is a very efficient runner, brings good ball security, and ranks in the 86th percentile in PFF grades, both on zone runs in particular. So the fit, obviously, easy to see there. The durability, obviously, an issue in terms of last season. But this is a guy that's had success in the league, and I think would be a really good number 2 option for the Raiders if he can recapture kind of what he did the first half of the season there, because he was on a tear. If that's who he is and stays healthy, big time hit. But this is the guy that I really like. And honestly, you guys that know that I'm a Buccaneers fan might be like, oh yeah, duh. Rachaad White. That's a guy that I think would be really interesting to come here to Vegas. Obviously, he's got the ties to Tampa with Spytech as well. He had some issues with ball security his first 3 seasons, but he cleaned that up in a big way last year and didn't have a single fumble all season long, and he's coming off of a hell of a season as well. Probably his best season of his career. He graded in the 98th percentile in gap runs and 94th percentile on zone runs as well. So he's got the versatility, but obviously excelled a bit more on some of those zone schemes and zone concepts that we're going to see here in Las Vegas. For me, he would be my pick if I were calling the shots right here. I really like what he did in Tampa for my Bucks, and he's just a very interesting option. And again, brings some receiving chops as well. I don't believe he had a drop at all on 40-plus targets last season either. Then, again, guys, you've heard me mention Raheem Mostert. Okay, I've laid out my case for him to make a return with the Raiders, and maybe there's a chance that he comes back as their third-string guy. Who knows? But so I'm just not going to dive too deep into it. Like I said, I already laid that out there. But don't rule them bringing him back. He's also got the special teams production to go along with it well, with what was a rough season for the Raiders as a whole, obviously as a team, but particularly on special teams too. He was one of the lone bright spots, when he really got his chance back there. And now as we keep it moving on the offense, and I assure you guys, we are going to get to the defense because that's where things get really interesting, and there's some real, moves that I think could make a massive difference for this team. But starting here at receiver, this one's fun for me being a former receiver. I love talking about the wideouts. But again, I'm not really sure how much they're willing to throw at this position here in free agency. So do keep that in mind. They may not be like throwing bags around. And obviously the first guy in here is Alec Pierce. He's 25 years old, so like you're getting him at a good time. But man, he's going to command a lot of money, and receiver is one of those positions that the money just keeps hiking up, you know? So right now he's in an interesting situation with Indy. It looked like there was a chance they were going to kind of figure it out with him. But he and Daniel Jones, they're trying to figure out what's going on. So they're almost in a similar situation to what the Giants were with Jones and Saquon back a couple years ago. So let's see how all of that kind of plays out as free agency really gets rolling. But both of those guys looking like they're going to hit the open market. And, Alec Pierce has also said, I think, too, he doesn't want to make a decision until he knows who his quarterback is going to be. I believe that was him that said that. If that's the case, that could slow down and bog some things up with him. So we'll see how it goes. But overall, just the case for Alec Pierce, this dude is an awesome deep threat, okay? He's tied for the third most deep catches over the past 2 seasons. He's had 24 deep catches. Like, the guy has been an unreal deep weapon, deep target weapon. And so, like, that's one of those guys that could come in and kind of help you take the lid off. Such a strong, guy as well. Strong hands, strong route winner, physical, all those things, like, would come into the fold and I think be a really good, solid player with whatever team he goes to. But again, I just don't quite see it here because, again, at a projected $24 million a year mark, man, that's just where I don't think right now where the Raiders are at. It's like 20-something% of your cap space, at least with where they're going to be at roughly. I just don't see it, and neither does Vinny Bonsignore. Like, we'll dive into the receiver position as well later on in the show here. The next guy is where I think is an interesting one, okay? It's Romeo Doubs, another 25-year-old. This is kind of where I think maybe they go bargain hunting, and it may not be Doubs. Maybe they find another place to go, another guy to bring in that's kind of a quote-unquote bargain, but I like the fit with him, okay? He has flown under the radar given the depth that the Packers have at receiver, and this kid just always seems to find a way to produce, okay? Year in and year out. He has got a 70-plus PFF receiving grade in each of his past 3 seasons. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to come in and be the top dog, Devontae Adams type difference maker, but I do think he can handle a much bigger role, and I'd be curious to see what he does in a larger role, just given what his metrics kind of show there. And he's also been really good at hauling in contested catches as well. He has 45 catches on 91 contested targets since entering the league. Not too shabby right there. And at a projected $12 million per year, Doubs wouldn't even rank inside the top 30 highest paid receivers. And obviously, like I noted, receiver wild is getting kind of wild. Receiver money, that is getting kind of wild, and it just keeps going up. So getting a producer like him who has just been very consistent screams intelligently aggressive to me. So I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. Now, this is another one that would be very interesting, would command a bit more money, but it's Juwan Jennings. I'm throwing him in there because, look, he is obviously an easy fit for the scheme coming from San Francisco. And to be honest, like, they have the cap space, I think, to sign him. I think John Lynch has said that he wants to figure out a way to bring him back. So I'd imagine they probably do. But if he does make it to market to the point where, like, teams are actually bidding on his services, I just think all around, like, he would be a solid player for the Raiders. Like, the stats obviously won't jump off the page and wow you, almost like a Jacoby Myers. It's not going to be anything where you're like, oh my God. But he is graded out really well as a receiver, and his 39 contested catches since the start of 2024, which is including the postseason, are the most of any receiver in the league. The guy can go and get it, and he's also been really reliable, particularly too on third down. Like, this is one of those guys like third and Juwan. We all know third and Renfro from back in the day. Third and Juwan is a thing with him. So look, this is just a guy that is just reliable. Wouldn't cost a ton. Projections are putting him right around that $16 million a year mark, which would actually rank 29th in average annual value among receivers. And again, he knows the scheme family better than just about any receiver out there. One of those guys that's a vet that could come in and really help bring Fernando Mendoza along in this offense. So that's a lot with them. Bear with me here as I take a sip of water and try and keep this thing rolling, guys. Okay, that's a lot of talking. So now let's keep it rolling and get to the defense here, okay? We're going to start on the defensive line, particularly on the interior. There are a lot of older guys there. I think there are plenty of options in the draft here. If Lee Hunter or Caden McDonald did it in the second, I run that card to the podium, okay? If they're there at the top of the second, you go and take him, like no questions asked, because you've got to figure out a nose tackle. If not, I'm intrigued by guys like Dominique Orange, possibly in the third round, or even Darrell Jackson Jr., depending on where he slides as well. But he seems to be around there. So I'm just like waiting to address nose tackle in the draft, because to me, excuse me, when I look at this nose tackle class, it's a lot of like aging guys and stuff. There's no names that where I look at them and I'm like, ooh, really interesting, shrewd pick, or guy going to be there for a long time. So again, I find that guy in the draft. I think there's plenty of options of guys that are like 320 plus pounds that can just plug the middle of that thing and really help you set the, not a cornerstone, but set like a foundation of your defense in the middle there. There's also some really good edge defenders in the draft as well. So I am also curious to see how that kind of shakes out and how the Raiders go in terms of that whole deal. And then obviously, again, we have to wait and see how things transpire with Max Crosby and the Raiders and what actually happens. Vinny and I dive into that more, but as a shocker here, guys, like I've come around to the idea, like I think Max is probably going to be gone. I didn't want to make some massive deal out of it, but I think he is going to end up being gone. I just there's been some things that have gone on and reading between the leaves of some of his actions and whatnot. It just feels like he's kind of ready to go too. So we'll wait and see how that goes. But just overall here, I'm going to throw out some more names that are all kind of a mix of the down linemen and stand-up guys along the defensive front. So they're all going to be kind of jumbled together in here. But obviously Trey Hendrickson is no doubter, number one out there on the free agent class. He will have tons of suitors, obviously. Maybe they could try and bring him in opposite of Max Crosby. If they end up trading Max Crosby, good God, would that be a great way to be able to try and bring him in and help replace him. Jalen Phillips is also going to be another popular name. He's got ties to Leonard. Obviously, he has the injury issues, and I think it was like back in college with the concussions and the forced retirement almost and everything. So like just a scary, weird option, but like, unreal player again with ties to Leonard from their time together in Miami. Keep an eye on him. Odafe Owe. He's got experience with Leonard back in Baltimore. That's key because his defense is going to be real similar, I think, to what they were running there in Baltimore when he was there. And Owe's production, hard to argue with. He's had 50-plus pressures in 4 of his 5 NFL seasons and back-to-back years with north of 10 sacks. The guy's just a monster. Again, if you can get him, go run that check over to him and make it happen. But again, those guys are going to command top dollar. And yes, the Raiders can't afford it. And I'm not trying to be the cheap guy here, but I'm just trying to make the shrewd moves and spread this money around as long as possible to get as many like quality, good players and talent injected into this roster, okay? So that's how I'm trying to go about structuring this free agency approach and not seeing them throw just a ton of money and a ton of cash at like a few guys, all right? Again, I want to spread this thing around for them, which brings me to my favorite choice for the Raiders at edge if they do go the free agency route at that position. I really like Boye Mafe, okay? I'm going to spend some time here on them. So kick back and really sit back and take this one in, okay? Yes, he's coming off a season where he had career lows in tackles and sacks, but keep in mind, he became more of a role player in Seattle on a team that just won the Super Bowl and was crazy deep at edge. And even with that, he still managed to put up at least 40 pressures in each of the last 3 regular seasons, and according to PFF, his 146 pressures over the last 3 years are 31st among all edge defenders. And there's more. His 19% pass rush win rate percentage per ESPN Analytics was good for the 8th most among edge defenders, which was higher than Brian Burns, Max Crosby, DeMarcus Lawrence, Aiden Hutchinson, Josh Hines-Allen, and Danielle Hunter. All of that sounds pretty damn good if you ask me. On top of that, his 41 run stops rank 34th at the position. And yes, his sack total trails some of the other guys on the market, like Trey Hendrickson, Odafe Owe, and Jalen Phillips. But look, it all, when you look at his other metrics and everything like that, like we just laid out, it all points to him being a real impact player for whatever team gets him, and I think the Raiders should go for him. And he could likely be had for around $16 million a year, which would put him in the range of being the 22nd highest paid edge defender in the league. Talk about a bargain for a guy that is going to more than likely outperform that deal. So I think, again, he's that dude where I would try and find a way to make that happen. And two, does have the tie-in to Kubiak from that Seattle staff. Obviously, I know other side of the ball and everything, but man, that's a guy that to me that screams like bargain hunting deal. A couple of years from now, we say like, man, that was an awesome move by Spytech and company. They really hit on that one. Now, Let's hit on a couple of the linebackers. First off, when we last spoke to Vinny, he noted the Raiders like a handful of guys in the draft on days 2 and 3. So look there for some more backers to come into the fold. They also have both the Bergs as well. I heard one of the guys in the comments call them the Bergs, Eichenberg and Lindenberg. And I was like, oh, man, I can't believe I never thought about that. I thought it was a great nickname for both of those guys. So I'm stealing that from you. I wish I could give you credit. I don't remember who it was that said that. But yeah, I like the Bergs. So we'll see what happens with both of them back there. But we're also going to dive into this position too later in the show with Vinny when he does join us. So again, I'm just going to throw out like 3 names that I'm really watching on the free agency pool out there for the Raiders. And first and foremost, this one's just kind of like the throwaway because I've thrown a couple of these in there where it's like, hey, look, if you get them, you do it. It's a no-brainer. That's obviously Devin Lloyd. Okay. There's no arguing about him. He's a complete linebacker, as complete as you're going to find. His 88.4 PFF grade ranked 3rd among backers, and he was inside the top 10 in both run defense and pass rush grades as well. He ain't going to be cheap. Be ready to pay him around $16 million a year at least. But if you can get that guy, you make it happen. We'll see if Jacksonville lets him out the door. I think Campanelli's going to want to keep him there. This is the guy that I really like, is Nakobe Dean. He's only 25. And a hell of a player, but he struggled with injury issues his whole career. He played just 5 games in 2023, 15 games in 2024, and 10 games in 2025. The big question is going to be, can he stay healthy? Well, according to RotoWire, get this, the Raiders were the healthiest team in the NFL last season in terms of games lost to injury. The study showed they lost just 83 games to injury. Brady's trainer, Alex Guerrero, who joined the team last year, might have played a role in some of that, so maybe he can help Dean's injury woes and help correct that. Also, shout out to the rest of the Raiders staff, training staff, conditioning crew, all those guys. Like they're awesome. They get these guys ready. They've been solid over the years. So, look, if they can fix that for him and they can take a chance on him, when this guy is healthy, man, he produces. He is a consistent tackler, having just a 9.8% missed tackle rate over his last 2 seasons. And although he is middle of the road in terms of his stats and coverage and everything, I get that. You want a guy to cover. But, man, he's such an athlete that you have to feel good about him dropping back into his zone or matching up with tight ends and running backs as well. So, not too much of a worry there. And to top it all off, too, he does have a connection to Rennell Williams, who the Raiders just hired away from Philly as their linebacker coach. He was able to get some of the better years back in 2024 out of Nakobe Dean when they want to run to the Super Bowl. So again, the connection is just there. That one is to me where I'd be like, if I had to sit back and really bet or circle guys from I think that could happen. I think Nakobe Dean might be a guy that could possibly look to come in here and reunite with his old linebacker coach there. And this is another one that I think maybe some of you guys might not love and I might catch some flack for, but Logan Wilson. Okay, he's another guy that I do think is very interesting. He logged multiple 1,000 snap seasons, so the durability has been there at a position that, let's be real, just takes a beating. And back in 2024, he was elite against the run, notching a 90 run defense grade. And this is a guy that honestly just has great vision at the second level to be able to see through all the trees and track the ball carrier. When the Raiders were getting ready to play the Dallas Cowboys, it was right after they traded for him, coming off that bye, when they got him and Quinnen Williams. And I remember talking to the beat reporter leading up to that game, and he was saying that Logan is just that guy that he and Quinnen and Kenny Clark there in the middle can just help completely change a run defense. And so that just really struck me. And so when they released him, I was like, wow, that's a little bit of a shocker. So I just think he's a guy that is a very interesting one to keep an eye on because at his peak, he was a reliable early down defender who could control the box and finish plays. Now, obviously, again, it didn't work out for him there in Dallas after they traded for him, but there could be some meat left on the bone there if you can get him to revert back to being that dude that he was again in Cincy. Just a very, very interesting piece to possibly bring into the fold there. And corner, it's a sexy position, okay? Vinny and I, we dive deeper into this position group, so I'm not going to belabor it too much, but we're obviously waiting to see also as well what happens with Stokes and, how that kind of transpires for here with the Raiders and everything. But there are a few very interesting guys that I do like on this free agent market. A handful of them are some of the top guys. Admittedly, as I said, I don't think they're going to see them throw a bag at other people. So I guess I'm contradicting myself a bit here, so don't roast me for that. But Reek Woolen, okay? I think he is a guy worth throwing a ton of cash at. He is a freak of nature, first off, and he's been locked down, allowing just a 76.3 passer rating into his coverage area over the years, okay, while also hauling in 8 interceptions and 20 pass breakups, which is good for the 93rd percentile in forced incompletions. The ball production has been there in a big way. He's only also allowed 3 touchdowns in coverage in 2025. That was in 601 coverage snaps. And again, like I said, the ball production has just been there. He's recorded at least 8 pass breakups in every season of his career. All that to say, the dude's legit. If you can get him, you got a monster on the other side there. And if they do that, and let's say this new staff does like Darian Porter, you have guys that are 6'4", and I think Porter's 6'3", 6'4". He's right on the verge there. But like, you got 2 long, lanky monsters, and we'll see what Porter develops into. But then also Reek maybe could help him kind of come along, being another like long, rangy type of guy. It'd just be interesting to see. But speaking of another guy who also kind of does have some of that length too is Jamel Dean. He's another interesting one to watch. Again, the ties to Spy Tech in Tampa. Yes, I know he's 29 years old, but he is 7 years into his career, and he has never posted a PFF coverage grade below 70. So he's a steady Eddie kind of force back there for you at corner. That's a guy just always figures out how to be good. And those guys are hard to come by in the league. That's a really hard thing to do over a course of a career that long, okay? And get this, though. Last year, he allowed just a 46.9 passer rating on throws into his coverage area. That's a vast difference from what we just talked about with Reek, who I think, again, is really solid. 46.9 passer rating on throws into your coverage area. That's insane. So much so that it was a top mark in the league last year. So you're getting a guy on a heater. You just got to be able to repeat it here in Las Vegas. Then there's another one, just kind of another guy where you connect the dots and stuff, and that would be Alani Taylor from the New Orleans Saints. Okay, he's another guy that is about to get a bag, so be ready to possibly pay him a lot of money, but he's got ties to both Kubiak and Joe Woods, again, from their time in New Orleans. So you can keep an eye on him for that regard because, again, the familiarity is a thing there. Now, PFF, you guys know I'm a big PFF guy. I throw out a lot of stats from them. I love looking at a lot of their metrics, but they don't really like him for some reason. But having said that, there are still some really good numbers from him, okay? Since entering the league in 2022, he ranks 4th among all corners in passes defensed with 52 passes defensed, and 3rd in tackles for a loss with 21 of them. Like, I don't see what's not to like there. Now, yes, when he was in the slot, he did struggle, but I think if you bring him here for the Raiders, like, you don't put him in the slot, don't make him your nickel. Go find somebody else that can go and do that. That's the big thing for me. But as we keep it moving, we're getting close to the end here before we go dive into this deeper with Vinny Bonsignore. And shout out to all you guys that are making it this far because I know I'm throwing so much info at you. But man, when I did the Combine deep dive, it was in a similar format, and you guys really seem to love that. So just trying to give you guys more of what you like and know and love from the show. And I love doing these deep dives too. Like, I love just nerding out and diving into the weeds on all of these guys and trying to piece through all the info and find out who's a good fit for the Raiders. So we'll close it out on the free agency class by looking at the safeties, okay? Now, before we do, I do want to make sure and note that this is a very deep position in the draft. So keep an eye on the Raiders possibly targeting somebody in the draft, like a Genesis Smith out of Arizona, who they actually met with at the Combine. That kid's got some really great coverage skills. There's also Bud Clark, who is super versatile. We talk about a nickel. This is a guy that, yes, is a bit undersized or whatever, but like ball production off the charts. You can move him around so many places coverage-wise, and he can move into the slot too. We talked with Matt Holder recently about him. I really like what Bud Clark brings to the table. So again, keep an eye on those two guys in particular, but just the safety class as a whole in the draft because it's a super, super deep group. But looking at the safeties that are currently going to be out there on the open market in free agency. Kobe Bryant, okay, he's an intriguing guy with the obvious tie-in to Kubiak from Seattle, okay? Yes, he is very, very underrated. Over the past 2 seasons, he's produced an overall PFF grade of 72.7 on what has been one hell of a defense over the years there. And he is a very willing tackler because, look, now what's in vogue is teams sitting in those shells, those 2 high shells in particular, and trying to defend the run and stop the run without committing a lot of bodies from the back end. So, like, you do have to be able to defend the run from distance at times. And this is a guy that's a willing tackler, and he's earned an 80.9 run defense grade since 2024. So you bring him in there, and you're not too worried about the woes of tackling on the back end that we've seen the Raiders have, not only last year, but in recent years in general. And I do just want to throw Cam Curl and Brian Cook out there as well. Again, I talked about not wanting to throw, like, massive bags at guys, but these are 2 guys that both of them are 26 years old and could both be key pieces that help unlock a defense. They're both great at disguising and come from staffs and schemes where disguising is top of the list. So they have that for them. And I also do think that Cam would most likely be a better fit in another scheme. I've seen him tied to the Cowboys and them doing things more similar to how the Eagles have done him in Fangio and stuff. So like maybe that's where he ends up going. But Brian Cook, if KC lets him go, and I know they just traded McDuffie, so they're very likely not going to just want more DBs to walk out the door, but Brian Cook is a guy that I would throw a ton of money at because we've seen guys in those positions really be able to unlock defenses. We can't forget that Rob Leonard has some history with Steve Spagnuolo as well, dating back to the Giants and everything. So there is a fit there with like the family tree of coaches for Rob Leonard. And if you want a guy who can hold it down on the back end when you do some crazy stuff in the front seven, man, he is your guy. Last season, he earned an 80.3 PFF coverage grade when the defense blitzed. That should tell you all you got to know about this kid when he is left out there to dry without a whole lot of help. I love that. Now, as I take a breath, and you guys probably do too, because I just threw so much information at you because that was a beast, I want to give you guys an in-depth preview, like I said, of what to watch for when free agency does get rolling next week, because it's going to be a lot of fun, and there's going to be a lot going on, so we're not going to have time to be able to dive into all the different guys, so I wanted to lay it out and kind of serve it up for you guys on a platter of what to watch out for. So for now, that's going to do it for me, like blabbering about these guys, at least just me blabbering about it. Instead, we're going to kind of split the duties now and bring in our guy, Vinny Bonsignore from Raider Nation Radio and the California Post to help us kind of peel the curtain back a bit more on just how the Raiders can try to navigate not only free agency, but also the draft as well. Check it out. All right, Vin, Combine's in the books, so we had to bring you back on to kind of rehash that and take a look ahead to what's going to be a very big week, just in the NFL, but obviously for the Raiders as well with free agency coming up. Now, before we start talking possible free agent fits and stuff like that, I want to get your take, because obviously you were out there in Indy for the Combine. You caught up with SpyTech. You were there for Mendoza. You obviously talked to Clint Kubiak as well. So I'm curious for you, as you left the Combine, what were some of your biggest Raiders-related takeaways from your time there in Indy?
Well, I think they're absolutely locked in on Fernando Mendoza, if that wasn't apparent enough. I also think that this is a draft where, while it might not have the A-list, blockbuster stars, there's depth at positions of need for the Raiders, whether you're talking about the defensive line, wide receiver, linebacker for sure, ton of linebackers. So I do believe that they believe that they can make some headway with some right decisions in the draft based on what they were able to see from this year's group, and I think it also sets up well now having a better understanding and a better handle of what will be available in the draft of how they can attack free agency to fill some immediate needs.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked about it when you had you on last week. Obviously Max Crosby was the talk of the town at the Super Bowl. He's been the talk of the town since then, really, too. Was in Indy, continues to be this week. What's your latest take on where things stand and kind of what's going on right now with the Crosby situation? Because obviously his name just continues to be thrown out there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that Max is has an eye on moving elsewhere, and I think. I'm pretty sure most of us can understand why he may have come to this place. He's given everything that he's had to the Raiders, and it's included multiple resets and rebuilds, and there really isn't much to show for it. One winning season, one playoff appearance, and I think as he gets to this stage of his career, he's looking at a chance to go to a place where he can win more immediately and play on the biggest stages. And I think the Raiders are aware of that and understand that. And they are open to trading him, but they're not going to just give him away for anything less than what they think is the true value for Max Crosby. And I think that's basically where we are. But I would imagine, we just saw the Trent McDuffie trade for the Los Angeles Rams. They were in on Max Crosby to some extent, but ultimately felt like the assets that they gave up for Trent were more, applicable in that type of a trade. Based on where they were along the defensive line and Max's age, they just felt that this was money better spent in this case. But at least it sets somewhat of a mark. And I always feel like once a fuse is lit, by one team or a couple teams being aggressive, in either trading away a player or acquiring a player, it usually spurs other action on, and so we'll see if this leads to something happening with Max here pretty soon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, you see these things kind of come about, and a lot of these trades, they were all negotiated and talked about in Indy, and so that's when things really start moving. Like you said, it could just kind of take one to kickstart a lot of them and get the juices flowing for some teams. With McDuffie, I mean, obviously, look, he's 25 years old. I can see why they made that move. You bring in a young guy that you can, bring in as a cornerstone, for your defense there. And the Rams have traded away those top picks at a high level, but they've hit on it, and they've made a resume of doing that, and it's worked out for them in a big way. We were talking about on Raider Nation Radio recently when I jumped on the show with you and Vince. Like, I've come around to the idea too that Max is probably, now to the point where he's ready to move on. Hasn't made a big stink about it. I do respect him for that whole thing, and obviously the love he's gotten for Raider Nation. But I think now that is kind of where things are trending. Like you said, though, the big thing is going to be is, are they going to get that return that they want for him? And I ask you that question is like, do you think it's actually out there? Do you think that they're going to get that Micah Parsons type of return, or something that will allow them to feel comfortable moving on from him?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Micah Parsons type deal. He is younger than Max Crosby. That's gonna, a cleaner bill of health. That's gonna play into it. But I do think that the Raiders will have some viable offers to mull over, and then ultimately it's going to come down to whether or not they feel that was just compensation for giving up a cornerstone of their franchise, a face of their franchise. So we'll see. But I do think that there's enough interest in Max Crosby and enough teams that are maybe looking at this the way the Rams look at this of, are you really going to find a Max Crosby caliber play? If you feel like your window is next 3 years or so, do you think that you're going to be able to find a player of Max Crosby's caliber right now that could deliver right now? Maybe not. Maybe down the road there will be a Max Crosby that you can get in this year's draft or next year's draft, but realistically, probably not, and certainly not somebody that's going to be able to come in and play to his level right off the bat. And I think that for that reason, there will be a team or two that says, you know what, it's a steep price giving up first round picks, but at the same time, are we really going to get a player of that caliber in this draft when we need it right now? So my suspicion is there will be one or two teams that ultimately come to that conclusion and then put a credible offer out on the table.
Yeah, and look, I mean, free agency could spur some action too if teams miss out on some guys, because obviously, like we know Trey Hendrickson is out there, and only one team can get him,
right?
So we'll see how that kind of pans out as well, if something indeed doesn't happen before all that gets rolling. So that's going to be interesting to see how that kind of pans out. But now, as we kind of turn our attention to free agency, still quasi combine here, because I'm curious for you, like you noted some of the positions of depth in this draft, obviously, like. I personally think, the Raiders would be able to find a safety that's a difference maker for them somewhere in this draft. You mentioned all the linebackers that they seem to like, obviously very deep along the defensive line. But as you look at the landscape of not only the draft and also free agency, like, how do you think they kind of play this? Because, like, look, obviously they're going to add depth pieces all over the place. But in terms of, like, where they go looking for some starters, how do you think they kind of manage it? Like, what positions in particular do you think, like, hey, this would be a good move maybe to lean more towards the draft, and this would be a good move to lean more at this position in free agency?
Yeah, I feel like I feel like in free agency they're going to come away with a one true bona fide offensive line starter, maybe two, but for sure one. In the first phase of free agency, a linebacker, a starting linebacker. I would also think that they would be dabbling in a nose tackle now that they're moving to a 3-4 defense. And maybe an outside linebacker type that that could play that upright pass rush position, coming off the edge in free agency, in NFL free agency. Yep. There's going to be obviously secondary free agent options. The 1-year deal guys, the 2-year deal guys. At various positions, and they need various positions. But that's how I would see probably the pecking order going. And I'm not saying that it's one over the other, but you almost can put a straight line together. Offensive line, linebacker, defensive line, I would say are the top 3 priorities.
Yeah, and as we noted before, the Raiders have a lot of needs, so like they're going
Yeah.
to take some swings for sure. And I'm just so curious to see where all the money does indeed go with a lot of. So let's kind of start working our way through some of those positions and looking at the free agent landscape of how it pans out. Okay, so starting on the offensive line, obviously center top of mind. My view, honestly, is like Tyler Linderbaum, obviously going to be the top option for a lot of different teams. If you can get him, you obviously go get him. I would lean more towards going in the draft and looking at some of these centers because there's some interesting guys that could be available there in the third round. Sam Hecht, one guy that really has caught my eye, but specifically in free agency, Connor McGovern is a name that's out there as well from the Bills. Even too like some lesser quote unquote guys that you could bring in would be like a Lloyd Cushenberry who's got ties to them as well, to both Kubiak and McCoy. And then there's a Tyler Biadasz too, who just comes from that zone scheme. Just at the center position, how do you kind of maybe wrap your head around some of those names and any other guys that could be wild cards that you think they should look out for, or just how you think this pans out at that position for them in free agency?
Yeah, I think if there's a legitimate chance to bring in a Tyler Linderbaum, it's something that the Raiders are going to absolutely have to consider. It's a position of need. He's in that 25, 26-year-old
Yeah.
range, perfect for their purposes. He's a leader. He fits the bill of everything that they need, and it allows you now to be more flexible with Jackson Powers Johnson and a Caleb Rogers alongside a Colton Miller. It really does help solidify the offensive line, and then you see what's happening over at right tackle with Caleb Rogers, or excuse me, with Charles Grant and DJ Glaze, or maybe now you use the draft to go get a more viable right tackle.
Yeah. I
And
like Blake
look,
Miller in the draft. I mean, sorry to cut
yeah,
you off there, but yeah, Blake Miller's a guy that really intrigues me.
yeah, absolutely. And so I think that would be the top priority. But you mentioned some other good options, and the thing about Tyler is he's going to be really coveted. And there's
Yeah.
a couple of places that you can look around. The Giants have a ton of cap space. His former coach is now the head coach of the New
Yeah.
York Giants. The Chargers general manager and their center just retired, and they have just as much money basically as the Raiders. Joe Ortiz, the former personnel executive with the Baltimore Ravens, who helped draft Tyler, is now with the Chargers, so is as their general manager. So that's a team to really keep an eye on. So that's going to be an issue because you have some teams that have some ties to Tyler that have just as much money as you do, and just as big a need at center as well.
Yeah, and I think too, look, like let's keep it real. More intriguing options, for me if I'm a player in the prime of my career wanting to go somewhere where I can really build it up. I mean, that's going to be an issue for the Raiders. Like, yes, they've got the money, but where are they going to be at competitive wise going forward? That's something that these players are going to take into account, because it's not like there's only one or two teams that can offer him, that 20 to $22 million a year range that he might fall in. What is it? Creed Heffrey is at 18 mil a year. I
Right.
mean, this guy's going to reset the market at the center position no matter where he goes. So that I think is something that fans got to keep in mind, and not get too tied, I think, to a Linderbaum there because he's going to be the belle of the ball for everybody. As we kick inside to guard, there are a couple of really interesting names out there. Isaac Seumalo is one guy who I think could be a very underrated signing, for the Raiders, and the way he just fits into not only like the zone blocking scheme, but also play action as well. He's done really well as a play action blocker as well. So I'm curious for you whether it's an Isaac Seumalo, even a guy like an Elijah Vera Tucker is another dude to keep an eye on as
Vita
well.
Vea.
Yeah, Vita Vea. Yeah. There's tons of guys out there. Zion Johnson is another one. Wyatt Teller too. There's some guys that are out there in the mix in free agency. How do you think that kind of moves and shakes for the Raiders at guard? Because I also too look at it on their roster. I think Jackson Powers Johnson is going to end up being a guard personally, and like you noted, Caleb Williams. You just spent draft capital on him as well. So how big do you think they would possibly go at guard?
I think interior of our offensive line, whether it's center or guard, is huge. And a lot of this is going to be about they know that protecting Fernando Mendoza and obviously blocking well for Ashton Genty as well, but protecting Fernando Mendoza and really setting him up for success by building a strong infrastructure around him is of paramount importance. So I don't think they're going to spare any expense along those lines, and if it means paying a pretty penny for an interior offensive lineman, that's absolutely what they would be willing to do, and I do believe that they're going to do exactly that.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's gonna be a lot of money thrown around along the offensive line, and I think that's
Hmm.
something Raiders fans will be happy to see. And again, like we talked about, like they do like the pieces that they have. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean they can't bring in competition and make it very interesting and give them all the options to will, because we've seen them kind of quote unquote. I hate saying gamble on the offensive line because they have invested picks into it,
Hmm.
but each staff that's come in hasn't like taken those big swings in free agency. So I'm real curious to see how that pans out for them. Obviously, let's now go to the quarterback position, just more so backup wise, because obviously the Raiders are going to have to figure that out. A lot of people still, I saw kind of the back and forth on Twitter with you and some folks about Geno Smith and what's going to happen with him. It's like a foregone conclusion. Like he's going to be gone, right? They're going to move on from him and have to
Yeah.
find somebody in there to be a backup, because Aiden O'Connell's a bit of a weird fit too, I think, specifically in this offense and in this scheme.
Yeah, right now they're basically holding on to Geno Smith, hoping that somebody feels like, hey, we got to go get a quarterback, and we'll do a pick swap, with because Raiders, if you're the Raiders, yeah, you want some compensation, but really what you want somebody to do is take the contract off your hands.
Yeah.
That's to me the longest of long shots. So more than likely he's going to get released here in the next few days to avoid having to. He's got $8 million of his 2026 salary becomes guaranteed if he's on the roster. I think it's by next Friday or somewhere within the next week or so. And that's not money that they want to commit to. So they'll release him. They'll eat the $18.5 million salary cap hit that's already baked into their finances for this year. They'll pay him the bulk of that salary. And somebody will come in, the Minnesota Vikings, whoever, and sign him to a minimum contract, and the Raiders will basically be paying him the remainder of that deal less the minimum contract. And but it makes a lot of sense. I don't think that they want to muddy the waters by having a Geno Smith on the roster as they phase into Fernando Mendoza. I think what they are going to bring in a veteran quarterback to sort of be that whether it's a bridge and or somebody that could be a real asset to Fernando. So think guys like a Case Keenum, a Jacoby Brissett, Brandon Allen, players that are going to understand their role, have been in that role, but could be a strong asset for Fernando in the classroom, in the weight room, everywhere else, the playbook, all of those type things. And so that's more the kind of player that they're keeping an eye on as far as the veteran backup that they want to bring. And, if Aiden O'Connell is still on the roster, then he'll also compete with that player. Maybe Aiden ends up being the number 2 or the number 1.
Yeah.
And the other player becomes sort of that wise old cagey veteran that takes the young kid under his wing. But it's going to be along the lines of that.
Yeah, whoever the backup or like placeholder for Mendoza is going to be a very key role, because even Jordan Rodriguez of the Athletic too had a really good piece last year about like what is tasked of backup quarterbacks,
Yeah.
and they are an extension of the coaching staff. So how that kind of plays out is going to be fascinating for the Raiders and will be really big in Mendoza, taking, coming in and kind of taking the reins and all that. And I guess kind of leads into this. This is an aside. I know we're talking about free agency, but no true quarterback coach on the staff. This is something I hadn't addressed on the podcast yet. And so I just would love your take, because there's a lot of guys that have been quarterback coaches and have done it. Do you like not having a designated quarterback coach? Obviously, it's a lot of voices in the room there, but a lot of guys that have had a lot of success, with quarterbacks. How do you kind of wrap your head around how that transpired for the Raiders?
Yeah, and it wasn't their first choice. They had candidates in mind, but for whatever reason, whether they got blocked by the teams that they're currently working for or whatever, it didn't come to fruition. So I think rather than force the issue by bringing in somebody that they're not feeling great about necessarily, or just to fill the position, they feel, and Mike McCoy and Janico and Clint as well. They've got multiple coaches on the staff that have filled that role before, and that could hold it down for maybe a year and then revisit it after next year. So it wasn't the plan necessarily, but they insulated themselves and protected themselves by making the hires that they did, that also included coaches that have handled being a quarterback's coach in the past.
Yeah, and I'm curious for you though too. And again, going to be kind of a quarterback coach by committee. But do you think there's one guy in particular that you think maybe takes more the lead role of that, on a more day-to-day basis? My view is like, hey, Kubiak's going to be calling plays and being the head coach. Janoko, the OC, not calling plays. Maybe he does lean more of that quarterback coach role, or does a Mike McCoy get involved because he worked more so with Cam Ward there in Tennessee? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think Mike McCoy, for me anyway, probably assumes a lot of that. I could be completely wrong, but I
Yeah,
guess
you and me
if I'm
both
Clint,
could.
yeah, if
Yeah,
I'm Clint, and I brought in Janoko to be my offensive coordinator, which for him is a promotion. I want to try to do right by him and give him offensive. I know he's not calling the plays, but give
yep.
him as much offensive coordinator responsibility as possible to allow him to grow, as a coach and somebody that wants to, I'm sure, be a head coach at some point. So, for that reason, if I'm Clint Kubiak, I would more side with Mike McCoy kind of being that de facto quarterback coach. But I think they're all going to kind of have a say
Yep.
in it. But the last thing you also want to do is have too many voices,
Yeah.
in Fernando's ear. So I would imagine that it's going to be a collaborative effort on what the message is going to be. But the primary messenger, is probably going to be condensed to one coach, so that you're not overwhelming Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Now, and let's move it to running back. Obviously, the Raiders have Ashton Genty, but we know Clint Kubiak likes to run those two running back, sets in a sense, and likes to have two guys that he can rely on, running back by committee. Now, again, Ashton Genty is going to be the lead dog. We
yeah.
all know that. But as you look at the running back market, what guys really stand out to you? Obviously, Kenneth Walker's out there. We talked about on Raider Nation Radio. I think that's going to command too much money. I'd love your take on him, but also some other guys that I think are very interesting fits scheme-wise would be like a Rashad White from Tampa Bay, J.K. Dobbins coming over, who's had a lot of success in zone schemes. Ball security's been really good for him as well. Tyler Algier is another guy that could kind of be in the mix too. Like as you look at the running back market of a guy that could be a good, 1A, 1B back there to Ashton Genty, how do some of those guys stand out to you, I guess?
Yeah, I really do like White, and he
Yep.
has a connection to John Spytek. He was
Yep.
part of the group that drafted him in Tampa Bay, so there is a connection there, and I think he fits schematically as well, and is somebody that would understand the role, and but also be ready to be called on at a moment's notice. I think Dobbins is really interesting as well. He's at that stage of his career where this is kind of what his career is now, right?
Yep.
And so I don't think he'd have any aversions to being to playing that role for the Raiders. But I also think in the draft, there's definitely going to be options. Um, I look at Jadarian Price from Notre Dame, and I wonder, man, that would be a dream kind of a backfield right there. But I don't know that
Yeah.
he's going to be there in the third round, let's say. But it is a pretty deep class for running backs. But I think a Dobbins and a White are guys that, and maybe even bringing back a Raheem Mozart. But
Yep.
I think more along the lines of the two guys that we've been talking about, Dobbins and White.
Yeah. Yeah, I think then that both of those guys too would be real bargain options. You and I have talked about it not only on Raider Nation Radio, but I've also mentioned it on the show as well too about Lycan Mostert as a number two guy. Again, vet, been in the system, would come cheap. In this scheme as a whole has found those guys, those undrafted guys. Those older vets, whatever. They've done well in this system and in this scheme family over the years. As we move back to receiver, obviously we've noted Brock Bowers, number one option, but the Raiders do need a number one receiver specifically. That's the key there. Do you think that's something that comes in this free agent cycle? There are some interesting names out there. I don't know that Mike Evans leaves Tampa Bay, and I don't know that that would be the right move necessarily for the Raiders to bring a
Right.
guy like him in, but Alec Pierce is in an interesting situation with the way things are going there, in Indy, and how they're kind of juggling between him and, Daniel Jones as well. Some interesting names in terms of scheme fit. Jawan Jennings is out there. Romeo Dobbs is a guy that I really like as like a sneaky good, guy to bring in. Maybe he wouldn't be like a number one option, but just a quality receiver. How do you think they approach that room? Even Rashid Shaheed is a guy that has experience with Kubiak. Like, might command too much money given the season he's coming off of. Like, what do you think happens wide receiver wise with them in free agency here?
Yeah, and also the wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh yeah, Michael. No, no. Oh my gosh, I know who you're talking about. We
Brian
just talked. Brian Thomas. Thank you.
Brian Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's a player that if the price is reasonable, it's somebody that I would be interested in if I was the Raiders. I think he's
Yeah.
got a lot of good football left, and for whatever reason, whatever happened in Jacksonville, there might be an opportunity to go steal a pretty good young wide receiver and have him be part of your present and future. And so that's more who I would be kind of looking at. As far as I don't think the Colts guy is going to get paid a lot, whether it's in
Yeah.
Indianapolis or someplace else. And I don't know. I don't know if you want to meet that kind of a paying price right now for somebody who's really not a number one wide receiver.
Yeah.
So you'd have to think about that as well, and maybe there's somebody in the draft that you can bring in. They don't need somebody. I mean, it's interesting at wide receiver because you still have hope for a Jack Best, you still have hope
Hmm.
for a Dante Thornton, but is there somebody in the draft that could come in and maybe override a Dante Thornton and be more what the Raiders need right now?
Yeah.
In the draft, that'll be interesting to see how they assess that group.
No, it really will. And even Trey Tucker, too, a guy who,
Yeah,
I think did better than many people realize in a bad situation last year and who was on the rise. You and I
yeah,
were at training camp, all year last year watching that guy, tear defenses up. He did really well, too, after a tough start against the 49ers in that joint practice, too. So that's a guy that I think with much better coaching, better situation all around, with Azani coming in, yeah, man, he's a guy to watch, especially with the way they use motions in this offense.
yeah.
Real curious to see how they create, some good like leverage opportunities for a guy like a Trey. Now, as we move to the defense, because let's be honest, we can skip tight end. They may
Yeah.
bring somebody in at some point, but the Raiders are set there with their top two guys. Defense is where things get really, really interesting to me when you do go and look at just the free agency landscape as a whole here. I'm curious for you as you look at a lot of the guys, specifically along the defensive line, because, like I said, there's a lot of interesting names there. You look at a Trey Hendrickson that's out there. Owe is another dude that's out there as well along those guys. Are there people in particular, as I'm struggling to find my list here of guys potentially at that position right now, but like who stands out to you amongst the edge rushers or just the D-line as a whole in free agency where you're like, man, that would be a dude that the Raiders got to try and zero in on?
Jacoby Dean, right,
Yeah.
from the Philadelphia Eagles, I think is somebody. I don't know, if you're to me the players that I'm looking at, Leo Chanel from the Kansas City Chiefs. I think it fits that age. Can he handle a bigger role? I think he can. And especially in the defensive change that the Raiders are making to a 3-4 defense, I think both of those players, fit that bill. Again, they're going to need a nose tackle right now. JJ Pegues is basically the guy that, by almost not by default, but he's really the only guy on the roster that you could project as a nose tackle in a 3-4 defense. So is there somebody out on the open market that fits that bill, or is that something that they're going to have to go get in the draft? So, the defensive line, and of course, what's going to happen with Max Crosby?
Yeah.
How much of that is going to be a need, this time next week or so. So there's a lot of, I think the Max piece really has to come to a conclusion one way or another so that the Raiders can truly understand what they're tasked with at the opening of free agency and the draft.
Yeah, no, it really is, and I think when you look at this free agent class, like there's a lot of there's a handful of guys at the nose tackle
No,
spot.
Kobe Dean, by the way.
Yeah, Nakobe. No, yeah, we all knew what you meant. Yeah,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of guys at that nose tackle spot there that are interesting, but they're on the backside of their career, older guys, and I
yeah.
wonder. And I look at the draft too, and I see some young guys that are there's like 320 plus guys, on days 2 and 3 that could be very intriguing and interesting for the Raiders. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they lean more draft at that position and instead go look to maybe bring in an edge rusher. Again, there's a Trey Hendrickson, Jalen
Hmm.
Phillips, Odafe Owe, Khalil Mack is even out there. Boye Mafe is a guy that I really like
Yeah,
as, again, another very interesting, shrewd signing for them. Clevion Chason, another guy that
right.
had a lot of success with the Raiders, and I think you go and see what he did now with New England after walking out the door. Could be one of those guys where Spytek's talking about, hey, I let too many good guys walk out the door.
Let's go get him back. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. And I forgot. I lost count. It's not too many true starters that they have that you could pencil in. Coming back, Adam Butler, maybe Max Crosby. No, none of the linebackers. Don't know about Eric Stokes at
Yeah.
cornerback. And is Darian Porter ready to assume a starting job over at the other cornerback? And so there's a lot of openings, not just in terms of starters, but also depth. The other side of that is that there's also a lot of young players on the roster that they're not starters, but could they end up being starters? The Tonka Hemingways, the JJ Pegueses,
Yeah.
guys like that. So there's a lot of different directions that the Raiders can go defensively, but there's no doubt that they've got a lot of roster spots to fill.
Yeah, you mentioned, a couple of the linebackers as well, Nakobe Dean being one of them, who I think is a very interesting piece. One, given his history with the Raiders' new linebacker coach and everything like that. The big
Yep.
thing is just, can he stay healthy?
Yeah.
Some other interesting names out there, Quay Walker, Devin Lloyd, obviously everybody wants him. He's as complete of a
They're going to cost a
linebacker.
lot.
What's that? Yeah, he's
They're
going to
going to
cost a
cost a
lot.
lot, both of those
Exactly.
players.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like, do you think that's a position though? Like, given the switch to the 3-4 as well. And again, I know we're all overblowing, how much they're going to be sitting in that 3-4 base, but linebacker's still a very key, position in this defense as a whole, and even with what they're going to be running. Do you think they'd be willing to spend top dollar for a Devin Lloyd type of player?
I mean, maybe in another year where they have other spots already locked down,
Yeah.
but and bring in a guy like that could really take you over the top. But the problem is they don't have a lot of those other spots locked down.
Yeah.
So is it better to spend a lot on one player or to kind of spread it around because you have so many other holes to fill. So that'll be an interesting situation to keep an eye on, because there's no doubt that he would help a lot, on this defense and filling a big hole. But there's going to be a big market for him, and it'll be interesting to see how high that number actually goes.
Yeah, no, it really will be. Again, if they could get Devin Lloyd, that's a massive, massive signing for them. But I agree with you. And you noted when we spoke to you last week as well that there's a lot of guys in that day 2-3 range, linebacker wise, that they really seem to like. That are some interesting pieces there. And again, a very deep linebacker class.
Right.
So keep an eye on the draft there. As you move back to corner, obviously it's an interesting situation for the Raiders because Darian Porter's there, a young guy that did show some promise. Obviously, it was the previous regime's perfect fit at corner, but everybody wants length at corner, length and athleticism. He has that in droves. Eric Stokes, we'll see what happens. Spytech expressed interest in bringing him back. It sounds like Stokes is also interested in coming back as well. As you look at the cornerback market, there's names like Alani Taylor out there who also has experience with Joe Woods and Kubiak dating back to their time in New Orleans. Reek Woolen, obviously, the shiny object there coming from Seattle. Josh Jobe, another Seattle guy, that could be interesting. Jamel Dean, another big-bodied guy coming over from Tampa, possibly with ties to Spytech. Even a Kobe Durant, from the Rams, given the move that they just made too.
Yeah.
They may not be bringing him back. So I'm curious to you, as you look at the corner market, who are some guys that stand out to you of how the Raiders, one, could possibly approach it, and two, that could be like, hey, that could be a good move, to solidify some things on the outside for him.
Yeah, I like all the names that you just mentioned, because you do have uncertainty with Eric Stokes, and does one of those guys, does a Durant, is he a better player than Eric Stokes, and money better spent on bringing him in, or can he play the slot cornerback position, because that's a position that they're going to need to fill as well. So I would not be surprised if, when it's all said and done, there's two cornerbacks that the Raiders bring in free agency, and two starting caliber cornerbacks, and one of those could be, I guess, Eric Stokes, but we'll see. There might be better options than Eric Stokes out on the open market. So and I don't think Eric's going to necessarily break the bank either. So
No.
He might still be around if they have to reel back to him or turn back to him. But I think they also have a really good understanding right now of kind of where they stand, what the market looks like, having talked to people in Indianapolis, so that they're going to be able to really strike fast at that position when free agency does open.
Yeah, and the last position to take a look at here is safety. I noted at the top of this, like how deep safety is in this draft class. So this is another area I think they probably lean a little more towards, the draft at safety, just because there are so many options, really in all the rounds available to them. But again, you look at it in some really interesting names in the market that could be game changers. Especially with the way teams want to be able to sit back in sometimes those like too high shells or whatever it is, and be able to defend the run from distance. Having a safety that can sit back there and cover a lot of room is big, and also someone who's big against the run too. Brian Cook from Kansas City, very, very intriguing to me. One of those guys that I think can unlock an entire scheme defensively. Kobe Bryant, again, we note so many of these Seattle ties, but because this is going to be a similar style of defense to what Mike McDonald liked to run when he was in Baltimore, but still have some ties to Seattle as well. Also, again, a Kevin Byard, I don't think he's a guy that maybe comes into play, but such a ball hawk and everything. Cam Curl, too, another guy. Like, there's a handful of them there, so I'm curious if anybody in that safety market entices you enough to bring them in free agency, or if you do think, too, that that's an area they really concentrate on in the draft.
Yeah, and I would lean more toward the draft only because I feel like they have their two starters right now. Obviously, you always looking for competition and to upgrade, and so I wouldn't rule it out. In free agency without a doubt, especially with the ties to the Seattle player and the Seattle defense. This is Rob Leonard coached with Mike McDonald back in the day in Baltimore. So and it sounds like that's kind of the direction that he's heading in. So it would make sense to bring in both of those Seattle, the cornerback and the safety, to really be able to hit the ground running in this defense. But with where they are at safety right now, with what's currently on the roster, maybe it's more the draft where they can bring somebody in to groom to eventually be starters down the road.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, look, Jeremy Chinn's obviously an interesting piece. He is that guy that played a lot in the big nickel and was moved around a ton and has some history as well with Al Holcomb, too, on the defensive side of the ball. And obviously Rob Leonard, too, being in the building then. So I'm curious to see what the usage is like for him, where he kind of lands, if they do indeed, stick with him in that role, or if they try and lean younger, or maybe bring in a more athletic guy at that position. And then obviously I'm curious too, as we close this one out though, Vinny, obviously Isaiah Pola-Mao is a guy that you were very high on, and we had kind of watched for a handful of years kind of develop, behind the scenes. I think it was a bit of an up and down year. Do you think he can be an option going forward for them, at that more of that like free safety spot? He seems like more of a strong safety to me, but I'm curious your take on how things kind of transpired for him in his first real opportunity to show what he could do.
Yeah, and it also helps when you have a better pass rush too. So that
it was a mess all across the board. So you got to give him some credit.
So, but yeah, and I think maybe using him in a different way than he was used last year, might help as well. But I've always been high on Isaiah, and I think that Rob is as well, and I think the staff, understands the versatility that he brings, the toughness that he brings, and he's a really smart football player. So if you have to go into next year with him as a starter, I don't think they're going to bat an eye on that. But if there is an opportunity to upgrade, that's what you're always looking to do.
Yeah, and hey, look, if you figure things out at the corner spots and feel really good about that, that can ease some of your concerns at safety as well and take some off of their plate, Because, again, it was a bit of an uncertain situation as guys were developing at corner. Love Caillou Blue Kelly, but we saw his struggles, and that puts a lot of the safeties in a bind too. So I think kind of a raw deal for an Isaiah Pola-Mao in general, last season. So I'm real curious to see how that kind of works out for him. And just what it looks like, because he's got the skill set, he's got the the measurables, all that stuff. He's a very interesting prospect, man. Vin, again, another fun one with you. I appreciate you coming on again and dropping your insight. Before we do get you out of here, what do you have cooking over the next handful of days here? This is going to be dropping on Thursday morning, so what should folks look out from you from the California Post?
Yeah, definitely keep an eye on the Max Crosby situation, and then also kind of setting the table for the Raiders coming up on free agency, the Rams, the 49ers, and the Chargers, obviously. It all gets started on Monday. Deals will start being announced and consummated, not officially announced, but leaking out, starting on Monday. So it's ready to go. Teams are built this time of year, or starting to get built this time of year, and I would expect everything to be fast and furious come Monday morning.
Yeah, Monday is going to be a wild day for
Yep.
all of us in the NFL world. It always is, as all the names and the deals get thrown out there. It's interesting. Takes a little bit of the luster away from Wednesday, when things officially open, but it's still so much fun. And what a way to kick off the week. Vin,
Absolutely.
again, as always, thank you so much for your time, man. We'll catch you later.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
All right. Hey, shout out to all you guys that made it this long. I know this is a long ass video. This is a whole lot of info that we crammed in there. Probably could have been multiple episodes, but again, I just wanted to get this one out, to give you guys time to listen to the whole thing. Maybe you broke it up into a couple days or something, whatever it is. Again, lots of information, lots of content. We brought Vinny in on top of my 40 plus minute rant about the free agent class. So I get it. I can get long winded, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was really fun for me to put together. Like I said, I love nerding out and diving into all of that stuff. So keep an eye out for any big news that goes on. If there is something worth doing, I'll jump on a live or throw out a short or something like that, kind of breaking it down. But the next time I see you guys will be very likely on Tuesday morning. I'm thinking next week for free agency that I'll probably end up doing, don't hold me to this, but what I'm thinking I'm going to do, just because there's so much fluidity and change, and obviously starting on Monday, that's when everything gets hot and heavy and you start seeing all the negotiating windows and all that stuff. I'm thinking I'm going to do live shows for both of our shows next week on Tuesday and Thursday. I'll more than likely do those live shows at 10 a.m. both on Tuesday and Thursday. I'll take a look at my schedule and kind of the landscape of things and for sure send that out to you guys, amongst all of our channels to let you guys know when you can expect it. But again, next week, very likely Tuesday, Thursday morning live shows. I love doing those with you guys. We haven't done one in a couple weeks, just because I've been, having recording schedules and whatnot, or recording segments with people and stuff, and I'm not at the point where I want to bring people on for the live shows just yet, but we will at a certain point here. But man, yeah, next week's going to be fun. We got a lot coming your way. You guys loved the one when we brought Matt Holder from Tape Don't Lie on. I told you guys it was a long time coming. Since then, Marcus and I have talked. He said he's down to jump on the show whenever. So again, we're going to get Marcus from Tape Don't Lie on the show as well. More of those collabs coming your guys' way. I can tell from the comments that you guys loved that. I did as well. So again, as always, thank you guys for the support. I'm stoked you like the content and what we're putting out here in the off season. And hey, look, buckle up. Enjoy your weekend. Relax. Get away from the craziness of it. Hopefully the Max Crosby news or something like that doesn't go down over the weekend, because I'm hoping you guys can just chill for a bit, because I'm hoping I can too, to be completely honest, because next week's going to be wild with free agency, and I'm excited. And that's, again, when we start getting a lot of the pieces of the puzzle of what this defense, what this team, what everything will look like for the Raiders, and then we get a much better idea of how they're probably going to approach the draft as well. So I'm looking forward to all of that, guys. Some real answers coming our way next week. So again, for all of you guys that made it this far to the end of the video, man, you guys are awesome. If you haven't already, do make sure you subscribe, because if you've made it this long, you must be loving the channel. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, guys. And again, check us out online at silverandblacksportsnetwork.com. As always, thank you guys. And like I said, we'll catch you again next week. Have a good one.